to our pod. And by that, I mean on Wednesdays we read. I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we are two best friends who do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. Right now, we are breaking into the earth
The Earth.
as we cover the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. And today we are covering the characters and themes of the book. Super exciting to dive
It's a
in.
difficult job.
Yes, it is. What did we sign ourselves up for?
I mean, I've been concerned since the beginning about covering this series because it seems like a monumental task because it's so incredibly deep and well done.
I mean, I think we could
So
cover this book for 2 months and just keep going into the themes
we
and
cover it for
characters at all
years.
times. Yeah. But Laura, before we break into that, what are you reading, watching, and or enjoying?
So, as you know, I've been really struggling to read anything, but I did read a book. It happened.
Impressive. You
I
did
read
it.
a book. Um,
2025 goal done.
a single one. Uh, but I was lucky enough to receive an advanced reader copy of Lightfall by Ed Crocker. Ed reached out to me last year, and I got to the book in January. But and the book is out now. Everyone, go ahead and go pick it up because you'll want to read it. It's really a fun book. But I was a little nervous because Ed reached out to me last year, and he was like, "Yeah, I wrote this book, and it's called Lightfall, and it's all about a world with no humans. It's a world where there are vampires, werewolves, and sorcerers, and there are no humans." And I was like, okay, I'll give
Totally.
it a try. And I didn't want to be like, Ed, I hate vampire books.
Yes, exactly.
but but internally I was very nervous.
hmm
So I did read the book, Hannah, and I think this is maybe, I mean, right up there with Dracula in terms of being like
Oh,
vampire books that I enjoy.
yeah, that's pretty
And
impressive.
and that is high praise because I like Dracula. But Lightfall is about this world where there's a class system that exists for
hmm
the different vampires in this society. And the type of blood that you drink or that you're allowed is determined by your class. So different,
Hmm.
like higher intelligent type animals are given to higher class vampires, and lower intelligence animals are their blood is given to lower class vampires, and there is like the lower class vampires are considered warns is what they're called, and they're people or vampires, they're not people, they're vampires who are technically immortal but they age because they aren't able to access the highest quality blood. And
Okay.
so they do age, they get older, and I think it is probably easier to kill them. I'm not remembering exactly, but the higher class vampires, they remain looking young throughout their whole lives and everything. And there is this worn vampire named Samantha who she works as a maid for some of the upper class vampires, but she's really gone through it in terms of the way that society has treated her and her family. Like
hmm
she's lost her entire family due to the injustices of this class system. And she basically wants to get back at the system and fight the power, essentially is what happens. And she ends up getting involved with a secret society of vampires, and there ends up being a murder involved of one of the
Ooh.
higher class vampires, and she gets involved with trying to figure out like who murdered one of these upper class vampires. And so there's these different factions of vampires. There's different factions of beings because we then are also introduced to these sorcerers who are really unique as well and have an interesting like societal system, an interesting class system. And then we're introduced to these werewolves who have a really interesting class system. So we have all of these different beings coming together with these different unique classes and abilities, and then we tie in this murder mystery to the whole ordeal, and it's actually just like a really well thought out, clever, captivating book. Like it started off a little
Nice.
bit slow for me, but it picked up quick, and
Oh,
I would say that
good.
I really started getting involved in it and enjoying it a lot. I would say within like the second chapter that it really started to pull me in quite a bit, and I wanted to know like, ooh, like that character's involved. I got to figure out what's happening
Hmm.
here. Like, I didn't think that they were going to be involved in this, or
Pretty big
knowing
for
that, oh,
Laura in a
wait a
vampire
minute, that
book.
happened in the past. We have to dig into that a little deeper, and I just thought it was like the timing was worked out well. It wasn't something where I was like, the pacing is off. The pacing is off because I've had that problem before with books, and I think that vampire books I am more critical of.
Right.
I really am because when it's something I don't like, I'm quick to pick up on flaws. But
Mm-hmm.
this book in particular, I think it just did a really good job of kind of like flipping the situation where it was not about like making vampires out to be like these horrible monsters, and it was more about like, what if the true monster is classes, like the class system?
Shocking thought.
Like,
What if it's
what?
class all along?
What if the shocking thing about what if the true monsters are those at the top?
Right.
And I think that it really just did a great job of kind of making a situation that's fantastical, but it was entirely human and relatable in the way
Mm-hmm.
that it was written. And I also just think that like Ed writes with a lot of humor, and his characters were like really easy to like, especially there's a sorcerer who is like part of this cult and everything. And he was super likable. I really enjoyed him. And then the main character, Sam, you obviously are going to feel connected to her as a reader because she's fighting this system and she's a Warren. She's had to undergo all these things in her life. So she's obviously someone you're going to feel connected to. But I thought that it was just a really fresh take on a vampire story. And I- my I put in my review that I put up on the blog, I was like, my biggest problem now is like I've gone all this time saying that I'm not a vampire person. And now I'm like, I want to read book two. And now I
Right.
have to wait for it because the first book just came out. But you know what? It's a good thing to have that kind of conversion. And I'm excited for the next book in the series.
Honestly, how dare Ed make Laura a fan of
Ed,
vampires?
you're in trouble now.
Oh,
Like,
how dare
I've gone a
you?
long time not liking vampire stories, but I liked this one. And I really just have to give him a lot of credit for just making this book very different. And I did really appreciate that, being someone who does not enjoy this type of fantastical being, that it was different enough for me that I was able to enjoy the story so much.
Good.
So yeah, I really, really liked that a lot. Another thing, Hannah, that I've been enjoying, I've been watching Skeleton Crew on Disney Plus. This is a children's
Oh,
show. I had held off watching it for a while because I was like, this looks very much like a kids show. It is a
yeah.
kids show,
Right.
but it's like Star Wars meets the Goonies, and I feel like it's kind of a hidden gem.
Oh,
I I
good.
did not think I would enjoy it. I was like, this is not going to be that good. I can hold off on watching it. But now I'm like, okay, I really like it. They're doing something here. I think the animation and the cinematography is really good. The child actors are really good. I think they do a great job. Jude Law is good. It's predictable, but at the same time, it
I think you
follows the
mean Ewan
formula.
McGregor.
Yes, we were just talking about Jude Law
uh,
versus Ewan McGregor.
off mic, I said I play this game called Movie Grid, and I confused Jude Law for Ewan McGregor, and no one believes me that they look alike. But if you didn't see the movie that they're in, it's easy to be like, was Jude Law in that, or was Ewan McGregor in it? So I do know that Ewan McGregor was in Star Wars before Skeleton Crew, and it was definitely Jude Law. But I did make a joke when Skeleton Crew came out, where I was like, look, I already confused Ewan McGregor and Jude Law. Please do not
And
put
now they're
them
both
in
in
this.
Star Wars.
Exactly.
So
I
Jude
was like,
Law's in the
please
Star
don't do
Wars
that.
universe now too. He he actually plays a pretty good villain.
Oh, good.
I do like him as a villain, but the show is really fun, and I'm kind of shocked by it. I did not expect to like it. This
Good.
was my surprise Star Wars moment, I guess, where I was like, this is the show that was one I wasn't intending to watch and just decided to on a whim, and now I really like it. And I think that especially if you have kids, you would really your family would really enjoy this. Like, totally need to watch it if you've got kids because it's a ton of fun. And if you like the Goonies, you'd like it. But I think it very much just like follows these formulas that just kind of work for most shows like this. And
Yeah.
it paid off because it's pretty well done. And I I think Dave Filoni is involved here, who is like Star Wars guru. And
Mm,
you know what? He really doesn't miss. He doesn't
good.
miss very often with his Star Wars productions. So props. I am enjoying Skeleton Crew quite a bit, and
Good.
some credit to. And let me see here just a second. Created by John Watts is the creator, but I wanted to say Dave Filoni was involved in this too. Maybe it was just because they made him like creative director.
Mm,
Oh no, Dave Filoni. Yeah, he's the executive producer, and Jon Favreau, who is the creator of the Mandalorian. So yeah, they're pulling out all the cutesy vibes here,
got
all of
it.
the father son, lone wolf and cub vibes for sure, and found family. So they've got all
Mm,
that going on. But yeah, it's a really fun show. I want to just shout out some of the actors, the child actors, Timothy Smith, Ravi Cabot Conyers, and then Ryan Kiera Armstrong. They are all in it. Let's see, there's another one I'm missing, but I'm not seeing the name here. But really, really great kid actors.
oh, good.
Very, very impressed.
Love to hear
Um,
it.
I think the other one is Kriana Crater, if that's the one I'm thinking of. I can't see the. Oh yeah, Kriana Crater is the other child star in this, and then obviously Jude Law. Nick Frost provides a voice for a bot in the show, and Nick Frost is fun. But yeah, really fun show. Highly recommend if you just want kind of a fun popcorn show and you like Star Wars, or if you have kids who you're like wanting to introduce to some kind of space story. Great intro. So,
Nice.
Hannah, what have you been reading and watching?
So for reading, I read the next sort of in the like in-world book series of um Alex Michaelides, The Fury. So Alex Michaelides, I talked about him recently on the podcast. I just keep getting his audiobooks. He did The Silent Patient. I listened to The Maidens recently, and then I was like, oh, I might as well get the next one, which is The Fury by Alex Michaelides. And
I didn't even realize this one existed.
yeah, that's okay. It came out really recently. I believe it came out last year. Yeah, it was first pubbed in 2024. So this book is a thriller, like first and foremost, and it's kind of like very Glass Onion-esque about this murder that's occurring on an island, and we have this person who's narrating it, who's part of it, who things happen, and then all of a sudden you get to see a different version of what's actually going on, and you learn more through this. And we follow this character who has had a very like dark past, and he is best friends with Lana Farrer, who is a ex-movie star, and she's bringing her husband, this man who she's best friends with, and her like best female friend out to this Greek island with her son, and they're just going to be spending like an Easter weekend there, and we find out someone dies. I would say that this was stupid. So this just
Oh, good.
feels
I won't
like
have to read it.
it's a repeat of The Silent Patient, honestly. Like
Do you
it
ever
just
think that sometimes authors have success with one book and they're like, you know what I'm going to do? Just make more of that.
yeah, I think kind of where he was like, well, The Silent Patient was so good, and I don't know if it's just like so this follows Elliot Chase. He is also an unreliable narrator. He also has this weird thing where like he speaks in plays. So the entire purpose of this novel is like, oh, it's unreliable narrator, but he also has this obsession with filling in the blanks of like this is what happened. And you're like, but
Yeah.
it didn't happen because you're not omnipresent. You only know what you've seen, so you're just imagining these things happening. And that can only happen if like this happens and then that happens and you're like, "Oh, okay, I guess." Like and so by the end of the novel I read it and I was like, "So what was the point of this?" Like we just talked about the Lisa Frank documentary and how it didn't teach you very much. I was kind of like, "What did this book teach me?" Like I don't think it led me anywhere except full circle. And it just felt a little bit useless to me.
Oh, good.
And by the end
That's
of
the
it, I
best
was
feeling.
like, he's so much of an unreliable narrator. I don't even think that happened.
Hmm.
And it's just like it was a weird book. I didn't really like it. I didn't find it that interesting, and I just felt it like it was just a revisit of The Silent Patient. And I don't know, I would rather rewatch The Glass Onion again. Like that one's
Which I've never seen
interesting.
that.
Oh, it's good. I like it. Um, but yeah, I just thought this one was very silly and it just was repetitive of older storylines that worked less well. And like, it's a very strange book and it's very strange to see all of this happening. And the way he views things is so random and so skewed that, like, I just don't think it's an effective way to do a thriller in this way where it's like, oh, I am the narrator, but I'm also a participant. And it's like, well,
Hmm.
okay, then like how do we know that that even happened? Because you weren't there. Um, so overall, I didn't like this one, and
Okay,
I
good.
feel like I sort of wasted my time with it. I liked the other two. They were like solid 3 stars for me, but this one I felt was a waste of my time. So
Okay.
I didn't like the character. I didn't really like anything about it. It passed the time, I guess. And then I also read Wool by Hugh Howey. This is the
Oh,
first in
yes.
the
Okay.
Silo series. I listened to the audiobook of it. I will say, like, it's an interesting background into this because these were
The TV show is
originally,
incredibly popular.
I know I want to watch the TV show now. But it's really interesting because this was originally novellas that they put into just like a long form book. And so it's really interesting because like they all are broken up in like novella type, like bite size of, almost if you had Murderbot become a huge like series where it's like, oh, in this book we're learning this. And it is more linear than Murderbot, but you just have a lot of that. And I thought it was relatively good. I mean, I wouldn't say it's like my favorite, but it had like good mystery and good interesting like doomsday post-apocalyptical, dystopian adventure. I thought that was interesting. Um and yeah, I'm excited to watch the TV show to see kind of what they changed and updated because I do think like sometimes the pacing was a little bit off, but if you're a novella that you're putting into a long form novel, I think you're also going to have that. And I think it's really entertaining, so I can see why people liked it and why it became a TV show because it does seem
Hmm.
like it's hitting a lot of the spots of things we're thinking about with like what does the future hold and where are we going and how do we survive after, global warming and all those things. And I think it kind of goes into that and like what would you do to keep people safe? I think that that's interesting enough to learn about, and so I'm interested to read the rest of the books. Much more sci-fi than I'm used to in certain ways. So, and a different type of sci-fi. It feels like it's a little bit different than a lot of the sci-fi you and I read, which is a lot more like Murderbot or things like this, where this feels more like fast-paced, kind of thriller-esque or kind of action-esque.
A little
Um,
more dystopian feel.
yeah, definitely more dystopian. So it feels like that. And so it's kind of fun to like read a different sci-fi, one that I'm not as used to.
I
Uh,
generally like space operas.
yeah, I know that.
But I will read a dystopian every now and then, and usually I like those as well. I can't say that I don't like dystopian novels because I was just talking with someone the other day about the Scythe series by Neil Shusterman because I was like, yeah, that series is really good. I
Yeah.
enjoy that one quite a bit too, and that's a YA series. But I usually like dystopians too.
I thought it was
I'm
a fun
curious about
dystopian,
that one.
so yeah, I wouldn't say it's like my favorite of all, but I don't think like I gave it 3 stars, which is pretty high for
Okay.
like a dystopian one that I was just listening to kind of again to pass the time. And one that I was like, oh, I wonder how they did it, and I could like imagine it, and it is very cinematic in its writing, so I can see why it became a TV show. Um, Starring, Jessica herself.
Jessica Atreides.
Jessica, Jessica Atreides. So I really liked it. I thought it was a good book. I thought, it's fun. It's intriguing. I thought it'll be interesting to like read the second and third one because I do think the characters didn't quite have their footing because it's a lot of learning throughout the first book.
Hmm.
Um, so a lot of build up, so I'm kind of interested to see where everything goes. And there's a lot of characters, so it was a little bit harder to like keep track in an audio version. So it may be helpful to have like a copy of the physical book with you. But I thought that it was entertaining and I didn't mind if I couldn't remember which character was which. I will say I accidentally read some spoilers because I was like trying to look up who was who, and then it just like says like, oh, this is what's happening. And I was like, Great. Good to know that at the
I'm
end of the
sure as
book.
a series that's been adapted is going to have tons of stuff like that on there.
Yeah, it definitely has a ton of stuff. So, be careful when you are Googling.
Good to
So,
know.
yeah, definitely be careful. So, well, and then for watching, I took Laura's recommendation when I was visiting my cousin this weekend in Chicago, and we watched Man on the Inside. Um,
Oh,
it was very cute. I would say like my one thing is you cannot convince me that what's his name? Oh, the main character.
Ted
What's
Danson.
Ted Danson. You
Charles.
cannot convince me that Ted Danson is shy.
You know what?
Like the
I am
entire
often surprised by people who are like, I'm an introvert. And I'm like,
right.
no, you're not. Like, because I am someone who, and granted, this is maybe skewed because I deal with social anxiety,
Yeah.
but when people tell me they're introverts, I generally want to equate that with them being like me, where it's like almost nearly impossible to have a conversation in person with someone. But that does not exist for all people who.
No.
I'm always like, Laura, it's not a monolith. People are not a monolith. It's there's a variety of different
Yes,
expressions of personality, but I I do agree that it's a little hard to believe that this is not an outgoing man.
right, because he's so charismatic. And I think that's the problem. It's like the premise of the show, like Laura said, I think even last week you watched it. Is he gets hired by a private investigator to infiltrate this retirement community to find out about some stolen jewelry. And he starts off as a character who like recently lost his wife. And he's supposed to be this nerdy engineer who doesn't like going to parties and like is so like, but he's also a professor. So I do understand where it's like, oh, well, professors are good at public speaking, even if they're shy. But at the same time, I'm like,
Sure,
no,
your
but that
job
is
can change things for you. Yeah.
yeah, but I'm like, no, that's still the most charismatic man I've ever met on screen. Like he walks into a room and everyone gets brighter around him. And I'm like,
Yeah, I
you
think Ted
can't,
Danson is just charming.
he's
And
so charming. So I kept being like, yeah, but like he is that charming. And he's not putting, it's not someone like coming into their own and finding out later in life, like, oh, he's so much more interesting than I thought I was. It's like, no, I think you always knew you were that interesting. You're amazing.
sure.
Like, so that just made me laugh the entire time I was watching it. I was like, you cannot convince me that Ted Danson is awkward gentleman who isn't the most fascinating man every time he walks into a room.
One thing
Um,
I'm sure you called it because you're usually really good at calling like how something's going to
oh,
end. But one thing that I was able to easily call how the show was
oh yeah.
going to end, but it was one of those situations where it was like obvious because the show had been so heartfelt and caring about situations throughout that I knew that that was the direction it was going to go because the show was not bringing any malice in.
No.
And it was devastating in its own way that when we get the resolution of who done it,
Yes.
that that was devastating in its own way, and just the situations regarding like loss of memory and memory care were handled with a lot of
Yeah.
grace.
I do I really appreciated in there was an episode because there's a lot that gets delved into this like feeling
For
forgotten,
sure.
um
Loneliness,
children who like think they're
neglect of
doing what's
children.
best. Yeah,
Yeah.
neglect of children, um discussion of what it looks like to like parent your parent later in life and like
Yeah.
call them out when they need to be called out on like a lot of these things delve in, but there is like a very specific focus on memory and loss of memory. And like I actually have someone who's going through early onset Alzheimer's right now, and it is really difficult. Like it is this like terrible moment of like you're losing yourself, and a lot of times people like recognize like in certain people it's different with everyone, but like in my
Sure.
specific situation there is a person who recognizes that they don't have their memory anymore, and it's like grieving that and then grieving a relationship that you had with them, and like there's so many hard moments. And I really appreciated that like it also showed that like Ted Danson was a character who he really wanted to help someone who was going through a situation like that.
Hmm.
And someone had to tell him like, "Hey, they don't really know you that well. You can't walk in and help because it
It can
actually
sometimes be
upsets
more
the
harmful.
person." And I do think that that's also important to hear because I think a lot of people can center themselves in someone else's experience,
Yeah.
and it was nice to see someone like call them out and be like, hey, you don't actually know what's going on. You don't know what we're doing. You're just coming in knowing that that's how these situations are handled, but you can't be that participant in this specific case. And I did really appreciate that storytelling. I thought that was really lovely and like heartfelt and understanding. So,
I think the show does a good job too of kind of portraying how situations regarding Alzheimer's disease are varied and
hmm
how because I know even like you just mentioning that like me specifically in my own family like I've had a grandparent die but there's not really any history of like memory loss in my family but my husband's family he has lost two grandparents who have had Alzheimer's disease and
hmm
equally devastating in different ways. And I think it was shown in the show as well how the family members really just grieve the loss of the
hmm
person that they knew. And I saw that a lot in my husband's family, how like when I married my husband, I was coming in at a point where I had only known them with
Yes.
Alzheimer's. So it was a different situation for me. But uh, to see the way that the family members were and have been impacted by the loss of a loved one because even though they're still here, it's a different person and the way
hmm
that their relationship shifts, it's there's been some moments that I've witnessed with my husband's family that have been extremely touching and like honestly moving to see the care that is
hmm
given for a family member who technically has been lost to
Yeah.
this terrible disease. And I think the show did a good job of portraying some of those difficulties, but at the same time recognizing like you said, Hannah, that these aren't always the best and people have good intentions, but they're always not always the best
Right.
ways to go about things in terms of like trying to help others who don't know you or
hmm
might you might make the situation scary or
Yeah.
more complicated. So yeah, I thought it just did a really good job.
Well, it made me think I haven't watched this movie, but I've like thought about it a lot. Like, oh, a movie I've thought about a lot, but I can't bring myself to watch. The Father with Anthony Hopkins, because I've heard that
Okay.
that's a really specific. It's a movie about either dementia or early onset Alzheimer's or Alzheimer's in general,
Mm-hmm.
but it's told from the perspective of the person who has it. And so there are moments when like different like this person who like has a daughter, all of a sudden the daughter changes actresses and he's like, who are you, what are you doing in my house? And it's like, dad, you need to calm down, like, and it is apparently like a very like stunning view of what that looks like.
Sure.
And I'm very interested in stuff like that where it's like that is a very scary moment and like you don't know
Hmm.
and people don't always like have that understanding of like it's not like in that person's head it is very scary and it's very frustrating and like it is, it's something out of their control and like everyone in life wants to have control. So it's
Yeah.
just difficult, but
Yeah,
um
absolutely. Hannah, I thought of another thing that I watched. Do you have another one to mention?
no, 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 go ahead.
But I thought of another thing just to kind of bring it up a little bit. I finished What We Do in the Shadows, the
I'm
final
so
season.
behind. I'm so behind.
Okay, I won't spoil anything, but the final season, I didn't think it was as zany as previous seasons, but they still did fairly zany things. They didn't fall into the trap of what a lot of final seasons do, where it's like they know there's going to be an end
Mm-hmm.
quickly and they spend all the time being like mushy gushy about everything. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't fall into that trap. There was still plenty of hilarious things that happened, but I would say it wasn't quite as zany as previous seasons, but there were some fun episodes and I also appreciated like some of the shout outs to like other TV and
Oh, good.
um like specific like moments where they kind of mimicked it's like art imitating art
Right. That's
situations.
good.
And I was like, that's actually pretty clever to call out certain shows like this in this way. So when you watch it, we can talk more about it. But I did enjoy the final season. I'm sad that it's done,
We
but
should do a
I
TV
thought it was well done.
Tuesday of some What We Do in the Shadows. I feel like
Yeah,
we could do
absolutely.
like an entire
I could
discussion
do an
of,
entire discussion just on the Jackie Daytona episode.
I know. That's why you have a t-shirt with him, just a regular
Just a
human
regular
guy.
human guy.
No, that's great. I love it. I need to watch it. I've just like fallen so far behind on that one.
I know that was one that you watched with your cousin.
Yeah.
So I when you mentioned that you had gone and been watching stuff with her, I was like, oh, uh, I didn't know if you had
Yeah.
watched it or not.
No, we have not yet, so I need to, but all right, well, should we dive in?
Yes. So we're talking characters and themes of the fifth season. Hannah, would you like to start? Was there a specific character that like stood out to you or that you want to
I
talk about?
mean,
There's not
it's
like a huge cast of characters to talk about.
there isn't. They're very kind of just specific. I mean, I feel like the ones that I like have the deepest to go on are, of course, like the three versions of the same character, as well
Mhm.
as Alabaster. I feel like I have a lot to say on
We also
him.
get Lerna and
Yeah,
Yika and Beanoff,
Hoa.
Hoa. Hmm.
Yeah. Um, so there's quite a bit to talk about here. I mean, it's just there's not a huge cast of characters, but I do feel like the characters all have specific themes that are inherent to them. Like with Alabaster, I think it's like how to wield your own power and at what point does like fighting no longer serve you and how can you just like escape and rest? Because I
I
think
feel
that
like oppression in general
yeah,
is a huge theme within the series.
yes. Um, and that's yeah, my thoughts are so scattered. Because like we start with the breaking of the world and we hear that it's the final time, and then by the end of it, we find out that it was Alabaster who did it, you know? And so I feel like the book kind of starts and ends with him in a very specific way that we didn't understand going into it. And he's such an interesting character as I read it because he was the one who stuck out most to me as like he's the character who has the most sympathy for people, but he also is a character who is broken down by society and he just like does not have he has the urge
Do
to
you think that
save
he has
people.
sympathy, or do you think that he has just a really strong sense of justice?
I don't know because I think he definitely has sympathy for the people who are harmed by authority, like the people who are at the different
I can see like at the node stations,
yeah, the node
but I
stations.
almost took it more as like feeling anger towards the system and that he wanted justice for a
I
lot of the
don't
things had occurred.
But I feel like for justice, like justice wouldn't be him taking and alleviating people's pain. I think it would be him like working through it. But he is like
But he does
alleviating.
break the world,
He
and
does break the world. Like, but I think that that goes into that where like I think sometimes people who have the most sympathy also have the highest um the highest reality of like being able to cause harm to others because they have so much sympathy it almost breaks them in a way where they're like well this is the only answer now like I keep feeling people's pain nothing is stopping it so I have to just tear it all to the ground and I do feel like he sometimes falls into that where like he is someone who like has a lot of sympathy for the node stations and has a lot of like this is the way the world works and it's awful but then like he also has moments where he's like well why don't you like me like why do you hate me like, and he seems to have a lot of emotion in him that like we don't get to see because we're seeing it from the outside looking in and perspectives that are a little bit more skewed because he's
because
with
we
like
only get Essun's and
yes
Cyanite's point of view of Alabaster, so obviously that's going to be one that's maybe not the most reliable when it comes to
right.
Alabaster.
But he is someone who like yearns for connection and he like begs her for like a partner, you know, like he's like, I just want to be touched. I just don't want to be alone. And so I do think he has a lot of sympathy and a lot of feelings that I found very interesting because then he is the one to break the world, like you said. So like I do think it revolves around itself of like sympathy can sometimes lead into justice of like, well, because I care so much, something must be done and then like someone breaks the world and they're like well this is just the only option because no one is doing what needs to be done anymore.
I think he's especially like the most heartbreaking of all the characters that we get, even though like all of them are very much shaped by the oppression that they undergo.
Yes.
Um, Alabaster in particular, he's mentioned at one point that like he was bred to order, like he grew up in the fulcrum. He's incredibly powerful, and that he's just continually used and held down by this system.
Hmm.
And I really think that the ways that he is continually manipulated and used shape his interactions with other people for sure, and
Hmm.
really kind of are the catalyst for him eventually breaking the world, but going about life with just pretty open views about things, that he's not really secretive about the way that he feels about things. He kind of recognizes that he has so much power, that
Hmm.
he's valuable to the fulcrum. They need
Yep.
him, that he can kind of throw around some of his thoughts more than other people can. He recognizes that his power gives him privilege, but at the
Hmm.
same time, he is so powerful that he mentions at one point that he's like a god in chains. And
Yep.
I think that that is a really haunting statement to make. And it's so many of the things surrounding Alabaster are very haunting, because we learn at one point that his likely a lot of his children are these node maintainers who are
Hmm.
quelling a lot of the shakes in their respective areas uh, of the stillness. And against their will. You know,
Hmm.
they're unable to control their power, and they're put in these comatose like states. And
Hmm.
so he not only has to deal with the weight of that on his shoulders, but also the weight of knowing that he is going to continue to have to work for this system that he
Hmm.
despises. And I think it's so interesting to see him get this glimmer of hope when they are finally on that island of like the pirate people, and to think that he's finally given an opportunity to just be free. Not that he's
Right.
given the power or the life that he deserves, just that he's given an opportunity to just have some freedom, to be able to have a lover, to be able to have a
Hmm.
child and be able to raise them in a way that he kind of wants to. And
Yep.
then for everything to just immediately go back downhill because of the oppression that he has been subject to his entire life is just heartbreaking.
Yep.
It's devastating. And so I think for me, I kind of see him as always just kind of having this anger that is below the surface, and being angry because he's often trying to change Cyan's view of how
Hmm.
she sees the world. He's very much exposing her to how the system is and how they are kept down by it because they are origins. And it's very eye-opening for Cyan, but for Alabaster, I think there's always just this level of anger that he's kind of suppressing. And then at the end, he just lets it go. And he's like, I'm done. I'm tired of dealing with this situation. So, you know what I'm going to do? Break the world. It's time.
Hmm.
You don't deserve the world as it is or what you're doing to it.
I do love the discussion with Alabaster as well about forgiveness, where he, or like understanding, where he talks to Essun at the end and he's like,
I was
just
going
so
to say,
you
I
know,
wouldn't say forgiveness.
no, because he says, like, I can't forgive you, but I can understand why it happened. And I do think that that's an interesting discussion, because I do think as a world we are very obsessed with forgiveness. Like, forgiveness is key. You have to forgive or else it will sit with you for the rest of your life.
Sure.
And I don't know, like it's an interesting discussion topic, and I think it is very like American to be like, well, you have to forgive people for their bad acts. And it's like, why though? Like, why do you have to forgive people? Like, you can understand and say, like, I can move forward from this, but like, you don't, because like, you don't have to forgive people. Like, you
I was
can
just saying,
say,
people are not owed
yeah,
forgiveness.
like, and I do think that it's a very strange obsession that people have. And I do think like, and it's because we know that it can harm someone. Like, as soon as heartbroken that he does not forgive her. And it's infuriating to her because she was like, I did what we had to do. I promised you I was going to do that, you know. But at the
Essentially,
same,
she freed Koru.
yeah. And she did what she had to in that moment. And like, it is devastating to hear, but there is a moment of like, but like, understanding is as much as he can offer you. And like, that is also something where it's like, I could do that myself in that moment and understand that I could do that, but I also would never forgive myself. Like, that's my child. You can't take that back. And I do think that there's certain things that happen to people where it's like, yeah, maybe forgiveness isn't right, or maybe it's not necessary for you all to like move forward from this situation, and you can both grieve that together. And I do think that that's interesting to hear.
I
Um,
think that's also just an interesting comment from the standpoint of like, understanding because they have a very unique relationship. And I
Hmm.
feel like of anyone that is interacting with each other, that Alabaster and Cyan or Essun know each other better and understand each other better than anyone in the stillness. Like they understand each other's motivations. They know each other so well. And for Alabaster to just be like, I understand, like he likely is the one who's going to understand her the most and what she has been through of anyone that she's dealing with.
Yeah. And like I do think that they are an interesting togetherness because they are in a type of polyamorous relationship where they're not like together or they don't see
Yeah,
themselves as
they said
together.
it's like an angle of sorts.
Yeah, but like they are in a relationship and they are raising a child together with a third person where every single one of them is a parent. They are together in a certain way, but like their connection is very unique. And like you said, like they understand each other the most, they see each other the most. But there also is that like level of, but we are apart from each other because we don't have like as many mixed emotions as can come with like a romantic entanglement. I think it's a very unique thing that Jemisin looks at because it is a way to kind of remove them from the romance, but still be together in some way, shape, or form that complicates things in a unique way.
Hmm.
So, um, I really liked that he was the one who broke the world. I forgot about the beginning, so I didn't see it coming.
There's a lot at play. I think
Yeah.
that you have to keep track of a lot of moving parts in order to like pick up on everything. And I don't know that it's possible to like, especially if you're like trying to look for things, I don't know that it's possible to pick up on
Yeah.
everything that's happening. And there's like stuff too that it's like, yeah, that will become more important farther on in the series. But yeah, I think that there's just a lot going on. I don't know that it's something you can always just like pick up on all of the things surrounding Alabaster right away because there's just so much there.
Yeah, and I am interested to see as we move forward, like his relationship with his Stone Eater, because there seems to be some type of
Antimony. Hmm.
antimony. There's some type of connection there, but also it's complicated because like antimony did like take him away during a very important part, and he wasn't always free in the way he
Yeah.
wanted to be free. It's almost like you get a reprieve from your, isolation and the power that society has over you, but it's never going to stay for Alabaster, and that is tragic.
Hmm. I think the entire story of Alabaster is just it's a tragedy. Like
Yeah.
there's unfortunately nothing great that comes about his story, but he plays such an important part in the shaping of the stillness.
Hmm.
So he's just incredibly important to the whole series.
Yeah.
How did you feel just like moving into like that epicenter of this angle? How did you feel about Inan?
Inan was the other partner, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
pirate from Mayav.
I don't know if I had many thoughts on Inan. Like he was such a like step over character where it's like, oh, this is like I didn't foresee him being there for the entirety of this book. Where he just
I
kind of
mean,
like
he
comes
wasn't.
in. No, and he just kind of comes in. He's, this character for both of them to love, and it felt like he was the character with the least characterization to me.
The
Um,
thing that I found interesting about him is that they were both so immediately drawn to him. And I think it was because he was so opposite of them.
yeah.
He lived a life that was totally contrasting what they had gone through, that he grew up free and
Yeah.
able to learn about his power on his own. And he just had this completely charismatic and different life and personality to them, which was like, of course, they would both be attracted to that because he's lived something that they both desire.
I think his biggest thing is kind of like what you're saying, like he was a way to look at the other two's interiority. I do think something that's interesting is he talks about how he wished he had their power a lot. And they're like, no, we
And
don't
their
wish.
training.
And
Like
their
he wished that he could have
training.
had the training.
Yeah, where he's like, if I had the training, I could do so much more with my life. Like, and I do think it's interesting to show that, like, because of the oppression that comes from like people being housed in the fulcrum and controlled by the fulcrum, if you're not a part of the oppressive body, you lack education. Like, and I do think that that is a way to keep people in power, to
Hmm.
keep the masses locked out of the education around them. And I think his frustration at that and saying, like, well, look at what power you guys can wield. Look at what you guys can do. Isn't this amazing? And they're both like, but it came at the cost of like our personhood and our history. And it's interesting from that perspective to know that, like, yes, if he had been powered by the fulcrum or gained that education, he would have lost like his culture and his people. And it's showing that, like, when there's an oppressive system that withholds knowledge, you have to give away your personhood in order to have that power. And it comes at a huge cost that both of them know is not worth the payment. And that's what they're trying to convince him. But it sucks because it's just so showing how this world fails its people, because it keeps those who could have more power or could have more understanding in those cultural areas that need it most. It keeps them without power and keeps them under this oppressive regime.
Absolutely. How did you feel about Tonki? Tonki or Beanoff, because we learned that Tonki was in fact Beanoff leadership Venice, who was the young girl that Demaya or Cyan met at the Fulcrum, and we find out that she's been following Cyan or Essun
Yeah,
for
as soon for years.
years.
And she's like, well, it was lucky that I got to interact with you.
I will say,
She's,
for me, she has one of the more unique backstories, even though it's just Jemisin does a great job of just like kind of tossing it out there real quick and just being like, here's what happened. That's it. And
yeah.
it's like, but wait a minute, that was actually very interesting. I'd like to learn more about that.
I think Taki is incredibly interesting because she is just someone who is very smart and had it. She's an interesting character because, again, she is like locked out of like her birthright because of who she is, but she did get certain privileges allotted to her because of her birthright. So it again shows like it's interesting because if we're looking at this, like you said, like oppression is kind of key in this, where it's like, well, yes, even in oppression, there are people who it's almost like you and I have talked about this before with people where it's like, oh, don't worry, they're one of the good ones. And I do feel like Taki is someone who it's like you still get the privilege of having a very specific family and power that you get to benefit from in certain ways. Um, and
She
so
very
I'm,
much recognizes her privilege, though, even as a
yes,
child, where she
yes.
kind of tosses it out there and is like, well, I'm from such and such family, and they're going to be looking for me. So,
So you can't do this. So I do think she's an interesting character in that end where we get to see how the power dynamics play out in every level, because a lot of this
and
has been told from the perspective of like people who were taught in the fulcrum. And then she kind of comes out and she's like, hey, there's more power at play here. I'm part of that power. Like you guys aren't the only ones. There are different types of power. And so that's interesting to kind of see her different perspective.
and as an adult, she's still using some of her privilege to get these people to follow Esun, to study more, like, because they're studying all of the different like climactic events, climate events that are happening
Yeah.
throughout the stillness, because she's a geomist. And
Hmm.
so she's also, kind of going to extreme measures to protect herself and the for the science, really, to learn more about what's going on, because she could have just, continued to live a very privileged life, but she decides to pose as a commonless person and live in a cave and undergo a lot of like kind of tough situations in order to figure out what is happening in the stillness and
Yeah.
why the system is set up the way it is.
It's really interesting to see her as like someone who's actually interested in not maybe even saving the world, but seeing what they can do and how they can navigate in it to like what will come of us all, type thing.
Sure.
Uh,
Let's talk about Hoa, because Hoa, I mean, we can talk about Lerna, but there's not really much to say about Lerna. He's a doctor from Tarimo who
hmm
is friends with Esun and has the hots for her. I
Yeah.
mean, there's not too much to say at this point. We could also talk about Yika, but I don't know that there's as much to say about Yika either, besides that
No.
she's just fairly interesting at this point because she's able to attract other origins to herself, and there seems to be something a little more sinister in the works there.
Yeah.
But Hoa, we get to spend quite a bit of time with because he's traveling with Esun.
Well, and he
To,
seems to be like the narrator of the Esun chapters where he's like calling her like us, or like you,
well, the whole
or
book.
yeah, yeah. So like he is the one controlling the narrative. So it's interesting. And I think it's interesting to see like this is how he almost has ownership over Esun in a way where he's like, oh, this is the second person point of view, like
He's very much attached himself to Esun.
yeah, and sees himself as her. So it's interesting to have him here because he is like this weird thing pulling the strings, and I don't know what it means. Where he says a lot about her power and how interesting she is, and how like she kind of like the world turns with her in a way in his mind. And it's interesting to see the way he's like navigated this whole book and his view of everything.
I think I'm going to hold off because we don't know as much about the Stone Eaters at this point,
Yeah.
and I don't want to say something that may be spoilery, but I do think that Hoa at this point is very much someone that we need to be paying attention to, and we're going to learn more about. But that Hoa is fairly fascinating from the
Mhm.
standpoint of his origins and his interest in Esun.
Yes. Do we want to talk about Shafa?
Oh, absolutely. This could
He,
take forever.
he's the worst.
I hate him so much.
I hate him so much. How awful could one man be?
What
Like,
what a compelling villain.
hmm he
I
is fascinating.
it's often I shouldn't say often. It is rare that I read a villain that I literally just feel ick
Yeah,
reading about them.
but you
But
do because
Shafa is the one.
he's disgusting. Like, every single paragraph with him is just a microaggression or a macroaggression towards
It's a
Demaya.
masterclass in abuse.
Yeah. And like the way he's like, I love you, but you're nothing. Like you can't die
Horrible
because
manipulation.
you're mine, but you are only useful to me because you are like less than. It's it's incredibly abusive. And like it's interesting to see it shine through with Demaya and then Cyan, where like she is so harmed by this man in so many just ways where she's like, well, of course this is how he shows love because I am worthless. And that must be how this is. Like you can't it's so heartbreaking.
I know a lot of people that I've seen talking on Reddit about this book have said that the Demaya chapters were the ones that they enjoyed the most. And
Mm,
I honestly feel like that is because Shafa is such a disgusting villain that people were kind of pulled into those chapters more,
yeah.
getting to see how Demaya was able to connect with Shafa and develop a love for him and think that he was the only person that cared for her when he's literally just horribly abusing her and
Mm-hmm.
twisting around the narrative of the entire stillness to make himself out to be a hero and make Demaya and the other origins out to be horrible, horrible villains.
Mm-hmm.
And and it extends further than just manipulation and mental and emotional abuse to physical abuse because he does in fact break her hand
Yes.
horribly, and he uses that type of punishment to further manipulate her,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just disgusting. But even when he reappears later on in Cyan's life, I think that it's such a deflating moment for her to see this man who she has such complicated feelings for because she grew
Yeah.
up in abuse as well. Like
Mm-hmm.
she was abused by her own parents
Yep.
who were in their own way playing into the oppressive system of the stillness. And that in itself is very complicated. But Shafa reappearing to Cyan as an adult is so horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And
Especially when he's like, "Oh,
the
good,
feelings
you've
of
bred for
hopelessness
me.
that
Like,
she has.
thank you so much. We'll get you more." Like, "Oh, it's so sad we don't have Alabaster, but at least we have his son who can be useful to us." And not even recognizing that she may be attached to her own child. Like,
Yeah.
he sees. children
They don't mean
as
anything to
yeah, they
him.
mean nothing. So it's just, and the only reason he feels horrified is because he knows that he's at an end and she will take everyone down with her. And he's incredibly self-serving. Everyone is at the behest of like his own furtherance of his goals. Like he is a deeply dark character in this novel series. You're right. He is the perfect villain.
He's really a great villain. I think when we get into the second book, we get a lot more Shafa, and we'll have more to talk about there because I do think that Jemisin, for better or worse, does a great job of opening this character up a little. Because
Yeah.
currently, the way that we have ended this novel, we just know Shafa as being this despicable human being who has no regard for any of the origins and seems to only have the interests of the fulcrum and furthering the role of the guardians.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we're at here, but we basically just see the way that he manipulates Cyan, Demaya, Esun, and how it's based in a fear
Yeah.
of oneself.
And I fear that you're less than, like, the first thing he tells her is like your parents had every right to lock you in a barn without
Oh yeah,
clothing. Like,
he makes her fearful of herself.
because you would have murdered them because people are so awful that if they showed you kindness, they in turn would have been murdered. So it's because of you that they had to act this way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just, it's not true. And it's cowardly. And he doesn't, he only sticks up for her for the dehumanization of like, you could have killed her and she's useful to me. But
More to come with Shafa for sure.
of
More to
course,
come. Do we want to talk about Demaya, Cyan, and Esun as separate entities or all as one?
I feel like we could talk about them as separate entities with
Okay.
the understanding that they're flowing, one flows into the other.
That they are the same person, but that they, as characterized in this book, are
Different
different.
stages. And like, and I also think that the
And I think that's
way,
important context too, to have, and also a unique theme to know that our lives are not static and that the way that we see the world and see ourselves changes throughout our
and
life.
I think it's almost like a literal way of saying like some people have to create different versions of themselves that are so diametrically different out of self-preservation. Because I do think that there is parts of that where like Demaya to and like Esun even talks about it where she's like, I can't be this me for very much longer, but my daughter needs me, so I have to maintain this. And I think that it's a very specific view of like some people have to remove themselves from everything that they built within themselves just for protection because they know that that person is no longer safe for them to be. And there's a desperation that comes with that where like these are the same person but they are different iterations for her to keep herself safe where
Yeah, she's
the
definitely tried to compartmentalize her life and experiences into these separate stories.
yeah. And so for Demaya, it is interesting. I'm not shocked that people loved the Demaya chapters the most. Because I also think that there is
And this is just a subsection of Reddit
that's
that
fair.
I'm noticing people saying that they liked those chapters the most. This is not for speaking for all readers, obviously.
Right. But I do think that there's something to be said, especially with this book being kind of like sci-fi fantasy-esque. I think, it's beautifully written and it's high writing, not saying that science fiction and fantasy can't be, but I do think that's a very deep novel. And it's interesting that I feel like there's comfort in the characters of Demaya because it is kind of like a very similar fantasy journey that we've seen where it's like, oh, a person goes to school, high achiever, and we get to see her fight to like become greater. So I do think that there's like a specific iteration of those chapters where it's like, oh, this is the first
It
novel.
very much fits a fantasy or sci-fi formula in those
Yeah,
chapters where we have a child who grows up in a life of abuse and is able to better herself through school and does it all, through the worst circumstances possible.
exactly. But
I
at
would
the
say that
same,
this one is a lot darker though than
yes,
other iterations of that formula.
because she is someone who like has to be left alone and it's interesting to show how deeply ingrained her self-hatred was because it's all out in the open like the grits are treated horribly and when she is bullied because she is someone who could be in power And then we find out that there's all this dark stuff happening, and then everyone just covers it up and moves on and pretends that nothing
Hmm.
happened. It shows how dark this world is and how they're pitting them against each other. But
And
like,
how little they care for them.
yeah, but Demaya is someone who's like, well, I have to buy into this. I have to do this because it's the only way I will be useful. And it just shows how awful this situation is and how like oppression
One of the things I
harms
found like
people.
really haunting about this was how Demaya kind of thought that the Grits had kind of a just system, that
Mhm.
she was kind of like, oh, I like the structure here. It seems like it's pretty fair. We've got all sorts of different people who look different. And it's like, oh, no, you're still in this horrible state of oppression. But because she grows up in such a way that she's abused and treated so poorly by her own parents, it would be eye opening.
Well, and there is that iteration of like, for the people who are the oppressors, equality looks like oppression to them because they're not
Hmm.
used to having to treat everyone as equal. I do think that there's also like, for people who are being oppressed, the a modicum of treatment of like fairness or freedom, quote unquote, feels like you're not being oppressed then. Like
Hmm.
she talks about like I get freedom of movement. I get freedom from
Oh, yeah,
harm.
she's able to explore. She's able to have food.
And so, even though I have no rights to myself, even though I have no rights to my bodily autonomy, even though I can be tracked by Shafa, even though I have all of these things where if I screw up, I could be beaten, at least I'm not dead. And it's like showing graciousness or showing thankfulness for being treated inhumanely
Yep.
because in her mind, she's not human anymore. It,
And then
it
it also plays into just that fear and hatred of oneself that has been instilled upon her.
mhm. Where, and she does think that the Grits deserve their treatment,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
it's awful because like it is this young girl who's trying to just be a high performer to make someone happy who doesn't love her. Like it's
Hmm.
so heartbreaking. But it's interesting. And it's interesting to see that like at every point she always gives Shafa the recognition of like he kept me from being murdered. And nothing is ever seen as like I earned this because of my
Hmm.
power. So like he makes her take the first ring test and she realizes it's so that they can't kill her because she did do something that they would just kill her for and not think twice. But she's not like, oh, I'm ready. And so I'm useful to him. She's like, isn't it so kind to him that he doesn't want me to be murdered? Like, what?
Hmm. He loves
It's
me.
incredible. Yeah.
I also wanted to point out about Demaya, just the aspect of loneliness and how that shaped her as a
Yeah.
person, because she is somebody who really needed a community but never was able to have one.
Yeah.
She couldn't find community with her own family. She couldn't find community within the Grits. And I wonder if that also was something that was directly purposeful of the Fulcrum to keep the origins from forming community, to keep them at odds with each other, and also use that as a way to further manipulate them
Yeah. No, I think that
via
that's
the Guardians.
I think that's very apt of like you have to control the way people see each other. And if you think everyone is against you, then you cannot become a community that's willing to fight for your rights.
Hmm.
But
As we move into Cyan, any like major thoughts on her?
so Cyan's interesting because again, she's a character who we're seeing like be deconstructed in certain
Yes,
ways, where she very
The Cyan chapters were actually my favorite.
I I think there were probably I probably lean more to the Cyan ones as well, just because I think it's very interesting to see someone
Hmm.
who has bought into things. And from the start, she is
Has to
like,
start
oh,
to question.
yeah, like she has bought into this. She is ready to just like mate with Alabaster. She does see them as less than human. And then as they travel the countryside, like Alabaster's like, you don't ask enough questions. You don't understand that we are a community. You do not get it. And he like opens her eyes to what's going on and all the things that aren't talked about.
Well, because she
And
very much at the beginning of this thinks that if she just gains higher status, she's going to be able to improve things for herself and
mhm.
others. And that's not the situation.
Not when you're in an oppressive society who sees you as non-human.
Hmm.
Like, you're never going to get powerful enough for them to see you as human. But she does see that, like, Alabaster goes into these communities and he demands respect. He demands
Hmm.
treatment like anyone else.
Yep.
And he is the first to point out, like, hey, we have the power here. Like, we're told that we are less than, but why are we the ones coming into these things to stop everything if they're not going to treat us with respect? And then she starts playing with that, which I was kind of shocked in the moment of her demanding respect after he was like sick, just because I
Hmm.
didn't see her as a character who would start thinking about that quickly. Like, she seemed like the character who had fully had the Kool-Aid, she drank
Yeah,
it.
she was totally buying what they were selling.
Right, but like it, so she was able to kind of turn quickly towards like, this is, he's right. Like, and I do think the node changed her where she sees that the person was mutilated. And I think like
That
seeing
was
that the,
definitely a
sh
turning point in terms of her relationship with Alabaster because I think
yeah,
before this, she very much did not respect him and saw this as just a mission that she was going to have to put up with.
right.
And I think when he was trying to like open her eyes to certain things, she was not really as willing to accept it. But at the node station, that was a turning point in terms of her recognizing that he knows what he's talking about.
hmm And I also think there's something inherent about knowing that this was a child who everything was taken away from him, and then he was about to be sexually assaulted when like this power came over
Yes.
him. I think that it's so dark. Like, it's
Oh,
so dark
awful.
to see that and be like, oh my God, he was able to protect himself in this one moment, you know, and it disrupted everything. I do think in that she sees how broken the system is and how you can't like fight just for power because this person was powerful and it still
Hmm.
happened to them because they were useful. And it's amazing to watch her deconstruction. It's amazing to watch her come into her own power because by the end of this book, like, it's Alabaster being like, look, I'm a 10 ringer and you deserve all the rings for what you've been doing. Like, you have six
Hmm.
rings. Like, that's what I see you as. And you have the power to fight. So please fight for our son, you know? And I do think you see that growth in her. And she is the character who has the most growth throughout this, where I think we're seeing, you know, bookends of her character. But I do feel like Cyan is the main character in this book.
If we're thinking of the character as like a bell curve,
Hmm.
Cyan is definitely like the middle section.
Yes.
And then unfortunately, I think Esun is that downward section of the bell curve where she's breaking. She's been through so much. She's becoming exhausted. She's having multiple moments where she's just exhausted and crying because of all that she's gone through.
Well, she is the Alabaster character at the end of the day. Like,
Hmm.
she is who Alabaster was when she met him, where like life has gotten to her where she was okay, where she's like, I met someone who was fine, and I thought he was going to be a good dad, and I had two children with him, and I tried to hide and I tried to keep them protected, but all I wanted to do was raise my kids and live my life. I don't want to be in this. I don't want to be involved. I'm done.
This might be a hot take, but I almost feel like, from my perspective, that Esun maybe has gone through more than Alabaster at this
That's
point in the
fair.
game. And again, this might be a hot take, but I think that on top of dealing with all of the oppression and things that she's dealing with, she also is dealing with sexism
Yeah.
and a lack of respect because she is a woman. And I
Yeah.
think the way that womanhood is portrayed throughout this novel is incredibly well done
Mhm.
and fascinating.
Well, because like Esun, even with the character who we didn't really touch on because he's not really there, but like Lerna's her only friend, and you find out he's romantically attracted to her, kind of hitting on her, and it's like, dude, this is not
Lay off.
like lay off. She's searching for her daughter. She thinks her daughter might be dead. She
Her
just
son
lost
was
her
just
son
killed.
by her husband, a person who she thought was safe. So like
Hmm.
she is dealing with the intersectionality of like being Erogyne and also being a woman, like, and not having
Hmm.
any power for herself. And she is like someone who it's implied that she's incredibly powerful, but she
Yes.
can't use any of that power because of the treatment of others around her.
I I do think that this is like a unique book because women are given leadership roles throughout
Hmm.
this book, but it does feel like to me that Esun and Cyan are treated differently
Hmm.
because they are women who are
Yes.
origins. And I, maybe I'm projecting, but it does feel like there is some sexism at play with that character.
No, I think that's very fair that like there's always sexism in these types of things and we can't like just close our eyes to it. It's
Hmm.
just like, nope, that's what's happening. And I do think it's dark to kind of see Esun like through this all and see
Oh,
like what
absolutely.
she's had to do to keep herself safe.
The
And
portrayal of mental health is excellent
yeah.
too.
And like just talking about like the brokenness of losing your son and having that and having to go through that grief and then needing to protect yourself. It's something where I think we've seen Esun after she's been protecting herself for years and keeping herself quiet and keeping herself safe and being okay with that. And then everything is still taken from her. And she's just kind of like, well, if that's how it is, like like what else is there but to jump right back in and get back into this and try to like keep myself safe, get my daughter, but like I'm no longer holding back until I get her. I think that's interesting.
It's also heartbreaking from the standpoint of knowing that she was a reluctant mother early
Hmm.
on who came
Yeah.
to accept the role and not necessarily thrive in it, but love her child and understand the importance of motherhood and her
Yeah.
role as a mother, and then have her whole world crushed, and then become a mother again to be devastated again
Yeah.
in a similar situation.
I do think this is a good look at motherhood. I always like I like that she's actually a mother when we see her. Because again, like in a lot of times in fantasies, we talked about this before. It's why we loved
Sort of
sort of
Kagan.
Kaigen. Because we never get to see actual mothers
Hmm.
represented unless they're like off the page cooking for people. Like, oh, I'm
Hmm.
making dinner for 5 million people and I never break a sweat. Like, it is nice to see an actual mother. And I do think like sometimes it's fantasy also has a lot of reluctant mothers. So I'm like, okay, I think it's fine
Yeah.
that she's reluctant. But I think it's good that she's a reluctant mother who didn't instantly have a switch that turned on where it's like, motherhood is the most important thing to me. Like, she's someone who is like, yeah, it took me a while to connect with my child. And I do think that that's good representation because I don't think we
I
talk
also
enough
think
about.
too that it's maybe, we talk a lot about purpose in this, and
Mhm.
I don't know that she necessarily sees motherhood as her purpose. She sees
Right.
herself outside of being a mother. Like being a mother is an aspect of her in her life, but she does not, like when asked about her purpose, say that my purpose is to be a mom. Like that she wants more. She
Yeah.
longs for more. She has skills. She's a smart, equipped, trained person who
Hmm.
is highly educated and able to do all these things. And I don't like saying trapped when it comes to childcare,
Right.
but she sees herself as being somewhat underutilized when it comes to her own skill. And I think that it's a unique perspective to have someone be like, I deeply love my child,
Hmm.
but I think that I I need to be doing more.
Yeah, I actually think that that's really good representation because, like, again, I
Absolutely.
mentioned this in the last episode. My mom was like the first to say like she loved being a mom. That was her entire life. She like was just the manager of a grocery, not just, she was the manager of a grocery store, but she was also the first to say like my job is incredibly important to me, and I think I would be a bad mom if I was a stay-at-home mom. Like she was like, I don't think I have it built in me to be only for my children. I need other people. I need this job, and it was like that's fine. Like, I think
Hmm.
we don't talk enough about like parents who love their children, but they cannot make their children the only thing in the world because it's impossible. And I do like that, like, Asun is someone who was like, no, I ended up having more children. I also like that she had more children after her tragedy because I think
Yep.
sometimes we have parenthood where it's like, I could never take care of another child, but it's like, no, I want more children. Like, having him made me realize, like, maybe they can't be my only thing, but they can be very important to me, and it's very important for me to have them. And then seeing her struggle through the second loss of one of her sons is it's hard and it is devastating and it's so hard to move on, and you do become like a different person after that. And I thought that was very beautifully done.
I also think it's interesting too from the standpoint of when we are dealing with Asun, how she is going through the grieving process of her son and almost in like a fugue state at times
Yeah.
because she is dealing with a lot of chaos happening in the world
Hmm.
and trying to navigate all of that. So a lot of times there's not time to
Yeah.
sit and grieve. So she has to just keep moving. But I think it's fascinating to see how her relationship with Hoa plays out because I question if she would have reacted differently to a Stone Eater that was not someone who presents as a young boy
Yeah.
because she had lost Uche and then previously Koru. So
Hmm.
I do think that that is somewhat tying into her connection to Hoa that she has lost two sons. So she's maybe going to feel a little more tied to someone who presents themselves to her as a lost boy.
Yeah, I think that that makes sense. And there's also just like there's a connection of, like they both lost something, so maybe it's her like when she sees him, she thinks he's lost his family. And so
Hmm.
it's like it's the inverse of what's happened to hers, so she recognizes it and she sees it and she wants to help him through that. So
Hmm.
I do think that there's that layer as well. Uh, it's interesting to see kind of the different the tragedy I think that is as soon as like she has had to have all of these tragedies as different people throughout her life, and she is someone who is still grieving actively on the page, but she doesn't get the like privilege of rest. She has to keep going. She can't, like, she has to go after her daughter. She doesn't know if her daughter's alive, and she just has to trust that like she can get to her because it's all she has left, really.
Hmm. Any other thoughts on Asun or any of the other characters? I did want to mention just that I think that Jemisin writes in a really lyrical way and a way
Mm,
that kind of allows readers to think a little more deeply about situations and from a more nuanced point of view that I
hmm.
think we don't always get. Because I think a lot of times, especially fantasy books, I think try to position characters in this is a good person, this is a bad person. They did a good thing, but that was really bad. And
Hmm.
I think that Jemison does an excellent job portraying characters who are going through such horrendous things and helping us to understand the motivations and why they would act the way that they do that we don't often get. And I really appreciate the way that it's presented and how we're supposed to kind of take in the world and the situations through this almost like lyrical, like history tale of sorts. Oh, even though it's like a history of the stillness and a warning of sorts, it's very much like a fairy tale
Hmm.
being written,
I
and
do
it's
think it
just
is.
really consumable.
And I mean, you're right. The writing in this and the lyricism in this book is so good. Like, I did tab my book for different things that just like hit me hard. And one is like, you are representative of us all. When one of us is lazy, all of us is lazy. And that is like a look at lower class people. Like, it's it's one
It's
of those
especially
things where,
moving when you think about this being written by a black woman
hmm.
and knowing that the this is obviously directly related to the oppression that the black community has had to
Yes.
undergo for their entire existence.
Hmm.
And I think especially as privileged white people, we need to be consuming media like this and
Hmm.
recognizing it for what it is, which
Yes.
is a not just a fantasy story, but a look at the ways that oppression exists in the world and how we can continue to oppress
Well,
others.
and sometimes how our oppression and hatred to leads to harm for all and it leads to anger that like is warranted. Like I'm looking at the different things I tabbed and one of them is when Esun, takes down the people at the gate and she thinks like you killed him. This is not a rational thing. You mean you plural, even though you're speaking to you specific. Rask didn't try to kill you, had nothing to do with Uche, but the attempt on your life has triggered something raw and furious and cold. You cowards, you animals who look at child and see prey. And that like it's so apt for our society right now of like,
I would say also even just like the ways that oppression and colonialism lead to the exploitation of the planet
mm-hmm.
and
Yep.
the destruction of the climate and
Yep.
all of these horrible events that are happening weather-wise. Um, pretty timely. Pretty
Pretty time.
timely.
Well, and like the colonization that you were talking about, like the colonization of people who have power and who have inherent like needs and things. If you look at like our microchips are created by products in Africa and
Hmm. Hmm.
we take it because we think we have a right to. And for some reason, we think that like power equals like worthiness, where it's like, oh yeah, well, the guardians are the watchers of the fulcrum. We watch
Hmm.
over um the origins. Like
The origins, yeah.
it's like, well, why? Why are you there? These are the people with power. Why are you the watcher and
Hmm.
control of power?
Hmm.
It is very apt for right now and the way we treat like climate change and the way we treat power. Where it's like, well, obviously because we have the power, we should wield it. And it's like, why? Like,
Hmm.
who cares about us? We are so low on the totem pole. We don't have like if we look at it with America, it's like, oh, well, we don't have the infrastructure, but yeah, let's slap tariffs on the people who create
Sure.
products for us. Like that
Makes
makes
sense.
sense. And it is just power for power's sake and it's
Hmm.
bluster for bluster's sake. And I think this
Hmm.
book is like, it's so incredibly good at pointing that out and pointing out the results of people who are oppressed for a long time and how they can view themselves, but how
Hmm.
the power is in them and they can choose to wield it. And, it's warranted.
Hmm.
So.
I also just a final thought. I just think that the book does and continues to do going on further in the series a good job of embracing science and the importance of questioning, but also studying things and learning more about the world and how it works. And it's briefly touched on here with the GMS and trying to understand Castrema, but
Mhm.
it will get deeper as we go forward. And I just think that that also seems to be like an important theme to in my mind to try to gain a deeper understanding not only of ourselves through storytelling and learning about the true histories of situations, but also to understand the world from a scientific standpoint and the impact that our actions have had on the world.
Yeah, I think that's wonderfully said.
This is a
All
fantastic
right.
book. It
Yeah,
deserves all the
everyone
awards.
go read it.
Jemisin
Well,
is a genius. And if you are interested in the audiobook, Robin Miles does a great job.
awesome.
Absolutely wonderful.
I told my old roommate to listen to the audiobook at your
Oh, yes.
recommendation. So,
She'll love them.
well, for everyone, next week, if you are new, we do a off week to give us time to read the next book. And so we're going to have a bonus episode with a librarian. We're going to be
Yay.
discussing libraries and all that they do for us and how
Libraries,
important
their
they are.
services.
So we cannot wait to discuss that. So please make sure you're tuning in next week. Laura found a wonderful librarian who will be speaking with us then. So
Yeah.
keep an eye out for that. Also, we had someone join our Discord recently. Thank you so much. Other people should join our Discord. Come chat with
Yeah.
us about the books you're reading, what you're watching, or what you liked talking about with the themes and characters of this episode. It's a conversation with everyone. So feel free
Yes.
to reach out to us over there or follow us wherever you can follow us at OWWR Pod. We're on Blue Sky. We're on Instagram.
Hmm.
We're on the social media platforms that we're allowed to be on currently. So
Yes.
make sure that you are checking us out over there or check out our website at owwrpod.com. Laura recently did a review of the book she
Of Lightfall.
discussed. So make sure you're checking that out. And I'm setting up another author interview there. We interview a lot of indie authors over there. So go
Hmm.
read through some of our blog posts over there.
And check
Uh,
out all their work.
And thank you so much for listening. If you could
Oh,
tell a friend about us or rate, review, and subscribe, that's a huge way to get other people to join in conversation with this
it really
podcast.
helps.
We really appreciate it. So please make sure you're
Mhm.
doing that. And we can't wait to talk with you more next week. Bye.
Bye.